The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth as Amina climbed the narrow mountain path. Her sandals were worn, the leather straps frayed from years of use, but she hardly noticed. Her mind was on the small basket in her hands. Inside, bundles of wild herbs lay neatly tied, each one carefully picked. She would sell them in the village market, and with the little money earned, perhaps buy a bit of flour and rice for her younger siblings. As she adjusted the basket against her hip, a sharp sound broke through the stillness, a low groan, muffled but desperate. Amina froze, her eyes scanning the rocky slope below. At first, she thought it might be an animal caught among the stones, but then she spotted movement. A figure sprawled at the foot of the mountain, half hidden by scattered rocks and thorny bushes. Her heart lurched. Without hesitation, she crouched, gripping the rough stones for balance, and began to descend. Loose pebbles slipped beneath her feet, but she pushed forward, her breath quickening. When she finally reached him, the sight made her chest tighten. It was a man, his clothes dusty and torn, his arm bleeding from a deep cut. His face was pale, lips dry, and his breathing uneven. He looked so out of place here, his shirt of fine fabric dirted with soil and sweat. Amina didn't think about who he was or how he had ended up there. All she saw was someone in pain, someone who needed help. She dropped to her knees beside him, her fingers trembling as she reached for his wrist to check if he was conscious. His eyelids fluttered, and a weak groan escaped his lips again. "You're going to be all right," she whispered, her voice calm though fear rattled in her chest. Quickly, she pulled off her faded shawl, tore a strip from it with her teeth, and pressed it firmly against his wound to slow the bleeding. The man's eyes opened briefly, glazed with pain, and met hers. For a moment, he seemed bewildered by the sight of this simple girl kneeling beside him, dirt smudged on her face yet filled with determination. Amina didn't notice his confusion, she was too busy fighting against the fear that he might not last. She tightened the bandage and pressed her small hands against the wound, praying silently that she had found him in time. The man stirred faintly beneath her hands, his breathing ragged as though every inhale was a battle. Amina leaned closer, shielding his face from the harsh sunlight with the torn edge of her shawl. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin, the strain of exhaustion etched across his features. "Stay still," she whispered softly, almost like a mother calming a frightened child. Her hands, though small and calloused, moved with surprising steadiness. She tied another strip of fabric tightly around his arm to keep the blood from flowing further, biting her lip as she worked. His voice broke through the silence, low and cracked. Why are you helping me?" The question startled her. She glanced up, meeting his eyes. For the first time, she noticed how unusual they were, sharp yet tired, like they had seen the weight of too many years. She blinked, unsure why he would even ask such a thing. "Because you need me," she said simply, her tone gentle but firm. To her, the answer was obvious. A person in pain should be helped. It didn't matter who they were or where they came from. He stared at her for a long moment, his lips twitching as if he wanted to argue, but no words came. Instead, his gaze softened, confusion mingling with a flicker of something she didn't quite understand, relief, perhaps, or disbelief. Amina tore one last piece from her already frayed shawl and dabbed at the dirt and blood on his forehead. "Don't try to speak," she urged. "Save your strength. I'll find a way to get you down." Her voice was quiet, but her resolve was fierce. She had no tools, no medicine, nothing but her hands and the will to keep him alive. She pressed the bandage one last time, then carefully slipped her arm under his shoulder. "Lean on me," she said, bracing her small frame against his much larger one. He hesitated, as though the idea of relying on her troubled him, yet he allowed her to lift him inch by inch from the ground. For Amina, it didn't matter how heavy he was, or how her back ached under the strain. All that mattered was that this stranger, this broken man, would not be left alone at the foot of the mountain. Step by step, Amina guided the stranger along the narrow path that wound down the mountain. His weight pressed heavily against her, each movement sending tremors through her tired body, yet she refused to falter. Pebbles shifted under her feet, and once she nearly slipped, but she tightened her grip around his waist and steadied them both. The man's breath was shallow, his head drooping against her shoulder. She could feel how weak he had grown, each step clearly a struggle for him. Now and then, she paused to let him rest, easing him against a rock before rushing to the stream that trickled nearby. She cupped water in her hands and brought it to his lips. "Here," she murmured, tilting her palms carefully so he could drink. The cool water dribbled over his chin, but some made it past his dry lips. His throat moved as he swallowed, and though it was only a little, the faintest color returned to his face. He looked at her again, eyes heavy but searching. "You should leave me," he said hoarsely, the words strained as though it took everything in him to form them. Amina shook her head firmly. "I can't. If I leave you here, you won't survive. And I won't let that happen." Her tone carried no hesitation, no fear, only determination. He fell silent, watching her with an expression she could not read, before closing his eyes as though surrendering to her care. As the hours dragged on, Amina's legs ached and her shoulders burned from supporting him, but she pressed forward. The village was still some distance away, and with every glance at the man's pale face, her urgency grew. When the roof of the healer's hut finally came into view beyond the trees, relief washed over her like a wave. Her breath came fast, her chest tight from exhaustion, but she did not stop until she had brought him safely to the wooden door. She banged on it with her free hand, voice breaking. "Please. Help me," she called. "He's hurt." The door swung open, and the old village healer rushed forward. Amina nearly collapsed from fatigue as the man was taken from her arms, yet even as her body swayed with weariness, her eyes never left him. She had done all she could, now his life was in the healer's hands. The village had never seen such a sight. One morning, long after Amina had nearly forgotten the stranger she had carried down the mountain, the quiet streets trembled with the sound of engines. Dust swirled as a line of black cars, sleek and polished like mirrors, rolled into the square. Children stopped their games, farmers paused with tools in hand, and women peeked from their doorways, whispering in awe. Amina, returning from the stream with a clay pot balanced on her hip, froze where she stood. Her heart quickened, not from excitement, but from unease. Outsiders rarely came here, and certainly not in such grand style. The car doors opened, and men in dark suits stepped out first, their faces stern, their movements sharp. Then, from the center vehicle, a tall man emerged. He looked different from when she had last seen him, his clothes now immaculate, his posture commanding. The sunlight caught the gleam of his watch, and his presence alone seemed to silence the murmurs of the crowd. Amina's breath caught in her throat. It was him. The stranger from the mountain. But this was no broken man in need of saving. This was someone powerful, someone the villagers instantly recognized though Amina did not. Whispers rippled through the crowd like fire on dry grass. "It's him, the billionaire. The one who owns the mines, the factories. Why would he come here?" Yet as his eyes swept over the curious faces, they softened when they landed on her. The corners of his lips curved faintly, as though he had been searching for no one else but her. He walked toward her slowly, ignoring the respectful bows and nervous greetings from the villagers. Amina stood rooted to the spot, the clay pot trembling in her arms. She didn't know whether to step forward or hide. When he finally stopped before her, his voice carried none of the arrogance his appearance suggested. It was low, sincere, almost humbled. "You saved my life when I was nothing to you," he said, his gaze holding hers as though she were the only person in the world. "Now, let me change yours." The pot slipped slightly in Amina's grasp, and she quickly steadied it, her cheeks burning under the weight of every eye in the village. She had expected nothing when she helped him, only to keep a man from dying. Now, standing before him, she realized her simple act of kindness had shaken the course of her life in ways she could never have imagined.